the misunderstanding. Captain Sarah Chin had been preparing for this assignment her entire career, but nothing in her diplomatic training had prepared her for the sheer beauty of the Valorian embassy. The building seemed to breathe with light, its crystalline walls reflecting colors that shifted with the time of day. Sarah stood in the entrance hall, clutching her data pad and trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. This was her first solo diplomatic posting, and she was determined not to mess it up. The Valorians were one of the most influential species in the Galactic Coalition. Getting humanity a seat at their negotiating table had taken decades of careful relationship building. Sarah's assignment as the human liaison officer was proof that Earth was finally being taken seriously in interstellar politics. She just had to not screw it up. A soft chime announced the arrival of her guide, and Sarah looked up to see a Valorian approaching. The alien moved with fluid grace, her scaled skin shimmering in shades of deep emerald and turquoise. Valorians were reptilian in appearance, standing slightly taller than most humans, with elegant features and large, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you. But what caught Sarah's attention was the pattern of bioluminescent scales that ran down the Valorian spine and across her lower back, glowing softly with colors that pulsed and shifted. "Captain Chin," the Valorian said, her voice carrying a melodic quality that Sarah's translator rendered in perfect English. "Welcome to the Valorian Embassy. I am Ambassador Thela, head of interspecies relations. I will be your primary contact during your time here." Sarah extended her hand in the human greeting, then quickly adjusted to the Valorian custom of touching forearms, palms up. She had studied the protocols extensively. "Ambassador Thela, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for accepting my assignment." Thela's eyes studied her with an intensity that made Sarah feel like she was being assessed at a molecular level. "Your credentials are impressive, Captain. Your expertise in conflict resolution and cultural adaptation will be valuable. We have much to discuss regarding the upcoming trade negotiations with the Centauri Collective." Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into understanding Valorian culture and communication. The language itself was not difficult. The translators handled verbal communication smoothly. But Sarah quickly realized that Valorians communicated on multiple levels simultaneously. Their words carried one meaning, but their body language, the positioning of their head crests, and especially those bioluminescent patterns on their backs seemed to carry additional layers of information that she was missing. During meetings, Sarah noticed that other Valorian diplomats would glance at each other's backs, and subtle shifts would occur in the conversation's direction. Decisions seemed to be made through some consensus she could not perceive. It was frustrating, like watching a play where half the dialogue was inaudible. Sarah began paying closer attention. She started noticing that when Ambassador Thela was pleased with a proposal, the scales on her lower back would glow a warm amber color. When she was skeptical, they shifted to a cooler blue. During moments of deep consideration, the patterns would pulse slowly, creating waves of color that rippled down her spine. The breakthrough came during a preliminary negotiation session about mineral rights on a disputed asteroid belt. Sarah was presenting the human position when she noticed Thela's back patterns shifting rapidly between amber and a sharp red color she had not seen before. Without consciously thinking about it, Sarah adjusted her presentation, softening her language and offering a compromise she had held in reserve. The red faded. Amber returned. Thela's posture relaxed slightly. Sarah realized she had just avoided triggering whatever negative response that red color indicated. Her heart raced with the discovery. The patterns were not just decorative or random, they were communication. Real, meaningful communication that carried information the verbal conversation did not. From that moment, Sarah could not stop watching the patterns. She began cataloging them mentally during every interaction. Sharp red meant anger or rejection. Deep blue was skepticism or caution. Amber was approval or interest. Purple seemed to indicate curiosity. Green was neutral engagement. And there were subtleties within each color. The speed of pulsing, the intensity of the glow, the way patterns spread across different regions of the back scales. She started testing her hypotheses. During discussions, she would watch Thela's back patterns and adjust her approach based on what she saw. When the patterns showed interest, she would elaborate. When they showed caution, she would back off and reframe. Her success rate in negotiations improved dramatically. The other human diplomats in the embassy noticed. "Sarah, how are you getting Thela to agree to these terms?" her colleague Marcus asked after a particularly successful session. "She has been stonewalling us on resource allocation for weeks, and you just walked in and closed the deal." Sarah shrugged, unwilling to explain something she was still figuring out herself. "I think I am just learning to read the room better." But she was not just reading the room. She was reading Thela. Specifically, she was reading the bioluminescent patterns on Thela's lower back and hips, which carried the most visible and complex color shifts. This meant that during every meeting, Sarah spent a significant amount of time appearing to stare at the ambassador's posterior region. She knew how it looked. She tried to be subtle about it, using her peripheral vision when possible, but the patterns demanded direct attention to catch the subtle variations. Sarah told herself it was professional observation, tactical analysis, nothing more. The fact that it involved closely watching her alien supervisor's backside was just an unfortunate anatomical reality. 2 weeks into her assignment, Sarah was called to an urgent negotiation session. The Centauri Collective had made unexpected demands regarding trade route access, and tensions were rising. Ambassador Thela needed to present a unified coalition response, which required coordinating positions among 5 different species representatives, including the humans. Sarah entered the conference chamber to find it already filled with delegates. The room was designed in traditional Valorian style, with semicircular seating that allowed all participants to see each other clearly. Thela stood at the center, her scales shimmering under the soft lighting. The meeting began with the Centauri representative outlining their position via holographic transmission. Sarah watched carefully, splitting her attention between the Centauri's words and Thela's back patterns. The ambassador's scales were cycling through rapid color shifts: blue, red, amber, purple, all flickering in quick succession. Uncertainty, Sarah thought. Thela was trying to formulate a response but had not yet found the right approach. Sarah glanced at the other delegates and noticed they seemed equally unsure. The Centauri demands were aggressive, bordering on ultimatum. Someone needed to propose a counter-framework that would not escalate the situation. Thela's patterns settled into a deep blue with slow pulsing. Cautious consideration. She was about to take a conservative stance, probably deferring the decision to a committee review. That would look weak to the Centauri and might embolden further demands. Sarah made a split-second decision. Ambassador, if I may suggest an alternative approach? Thela turned, her large eyes focusing on Sarah. The back patterns shifted to purple with amber highlights. Curious and open to input. Please, Captain Chin. Your perspective would be valuable. Sarah outlined a counter-proposal that acknowledged the Centauri concerns while establishing firm boundaries on coalition trade routes. She watched Thela's patterns throughout, adjusting her language in real time. When the amber brightened, she elaborated. When hints of red appeared, she softened her phrasing. By the time she finished, Thela's entire back was glowing a warm amber with gentle golden pulses. Strong approval. An excellent framework, Captain, Thela said, and Sarah heard genuine warmth in her voice. We will present this to the Centauri with coalition backing. The meeting continued for another hour, and Sarah found herself increasingly confident in reading the room through Thela's patterns. She contributed at key moments, always watching the ambassador's back to gauge when to speak and when to remain silent. Then mid-sentence during a discussion about tariff structures, Thela stopped speaking. She turned slowly to face Sarah directly, and something in her posture had changed. The other delegates fell silent, sensing a shift in the room's dynamics. Captain Chin, Thela said, and her voice carried harmonics that Sarah's translator struggled to render. I must ask you a direct question and I require an honest answer. Sarah's stomach dropped. Had she overstepped? Violated some protocol she did not understand? Of course, Ambassador. Thela's eyes narrowed slightly, and her head crest raised in a position Sarah had learned indicated intense focus. Why do you keep looking at my butt? The conference room went absolutely silent. Sarah felt her face flush hot with mortification. Every delegate was now staring at her, and she could see several of the alien representatives exchanging glances that even without understanding their species, she could interpret as shocked surprise. Ambassador, I was not. I was observing. Sarah stammered, her carefully trained diplomatic composure completely deserting her. You have been staring at my posterior region throughout this entire meeting, Thela continued, and now there was something in her voice Sarah could not identify. Anger? Confusion? In fact, you have been doing so consistently for the past week. During negotiations, during casual conversations, during formal presentations. Your eyes tracked to my lower back and hip scales repeatedly. I need to understand why. Sarah wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. This was it. Her career was over. She would be recalled to Earth in disgrace as the human diplomat who got expelled for inappropriately ogling an alien ambassador. Ambassador Thela, I sincerely apologize, Sarah began, her voice shaking. I was not trying to be disrespectful or inappropriate. I was attempting to. How did she explain this without sounding insane? I was trying to read the patterns. On your back. The bioluminescent scales. Thila's head tilted. A gesture Sarah had learned indicated confusion. What do you mean read them? They change colors, Sarah said, desperately trying to explain. During conversations, during negotiations. The patterns shift. Different colors, different intensities, different speeds of pulsing. I noticed that the colors seemed to correlate with the direction of the conversation, so I started watching them to try to understand, to try to anticipate. She trailed off because Thila was staring at her with an expression Sarah could not read at all. The other delegates were murmuring among themselves, and Sarah caught fragments of translated conversation. Impossible, no other species, sacred patterns. Captain Chin, Thila said slowly, her voice now carrying a tone of something like wonder. Are you telling me that you can see the variations in my scale patterns? The color shifts and pulse patterns. Yes, Ambassador. I mean everyone can see them, right? They're very visible. One of the other Valorian delegates, an older male whose nameplate read Council Member Vex, stood abruptly. The human sees the sacred patterns? That is not possible. No other species has ever demonstrated the ability to perceive our emotional resonance displays. Sarah blinked, processing this new information. I'm sorry, sacred patterns? Emotional resonance. Thila moved closer, and Sarah had to resist the trained human instinct to step back from what her hindbrain still registered as a large predator. Captain Chin, our backscale patterns communicate our emotional states and intentions to other Valorians. It is how we achieve consensus in complex negotiations, how we signal agreement or concern without disrupting verbal discourse. But the color variations exist in light spectrums that most species cannot perceive. Their optical systems are not sensitive enough to detect the subtle shifts. The Centauri cannot see them, Vex added, his scales now showing what Sarah was starting to recognize as agitation. Rapid red and orange flickering. The Draxian cannot see them. Even the Archons, with their advanced visual cortex, can barely distinguish the primary color bands. How is it that a human can see them? Sarah's scientific training kicked in past her embarrassment. Humans evolved as pursuit hunters on Earth. Our visual system is extremely good at detecting movement and color variation. We have 3 types of color receptors in our eyes, and our brain devotes significant processing power to visual analysis and pattern recognition. If your scale patterns are operating in the visible spectrum that overlaps with human perception, then humans can see what we have always considered our private communication channel, Thila finished, and now her scales were showing that purple curiosity color mixed with amber. Captain Chin, you have been reading my emotional states during every negotiation we have conducted? The mortification came flooding back. Yes, Ambassador, and I am so sorry. I did not realize I was accessing private information. If I had known it was sacred or secret, I never would have. Stop, Thila commanded, raising one hand. You are apologizing, but I am not certain you should be. She turned to address the room. Council Member Vex, if Captain Chin has indeed been reading my emotional resonance patterns for the past 2 weeks, and has been using that information to guide her diplomatic approach, that would explain her unprecedented success in negotiations. Vex's scales were still showing agitation. It would also constitute a massive breach of our cultural protocols. The resonance patterns are shared only among Valorians. They are how we maintain social cohesion and emotional honesty within our species. With respect, Council Member, Sarah interjected, finding her diplomatic voice again despite her embarrassment, I was not trying to breach your protocols. I noticed the patterns existed and made hypotheses about their meaning based on correlation with context. I did not know they were private communication. I thought they were just part of how you communicate, like human facial expressions or body language. Thila's scales had settled into a steady purple glow. She makes a valid point, Vex. Human facial expressions convey emotional information that humans expect others to read. If Captain Chin simply assumed our patterns served a similar public function, she was applying her own cultural framework, not deliberately violating ours. The question is not her intention, Vex countered. The question is what we do with this information. If humans can naturally perceive our resonance patterns, it fundamentally changes the nature of human-Valorian diplomatic relations. Sarah's mind was racing. This was either a disaster or an opportunity, and she could not tell which. Ambassador, Council Member, if I may speak frankly? Thila gestured agreement, her scales showing that amber openness again. If I can see your patterns and if I have been accurately interpreting them, then that suggests my observations could be tested, Sarah said, her scientific training providing a framework for what felt like chaos. Rather than assuming this is a problem, perhaps we should verify whether my interpretations are actually correct. It's possible I have been seeing patterns that are random or that I have been misinterpreting their meaning entirely. The room fell silent as the delegates considered this. Thiela's scales cycled through several colors before settling on a bright amber with golden highlights. Strong approval and interest. An empirical approach, Thiela said, and Sarah heard something like respect in her voice. Very well, Captain Chin. Let us test your claim. I will display a sequence of emotional states through my resonance patterns. You will attempt to identify each state without any verbal or contextual cues. If your accuracy is above chance, we will know your ability is genuine. Sarah's heart was pounding. Everything depended on this. I'm ready, Ambassador. Thiela turned her back to Sarah, presenting the full display of her bioluminescent scales. The patterns began to shift, and Sarah focused all her attention on reading them. The first pattern was easy, bright amber with smooth, gentle pulses. Contentment or approval, Sarah said. The pattern shifted to deep blue with slow, heavy pulsing. Concern or caution. Sharp red with rapid flickering. Anger or strong rejection. Purple with silver highlights, dancing patterns. Intense curiosity or fascination. Green with steady, even glow. Neutral engagement, processing information. Orange with expanding ripple patterns. Excitement or anticipation. The patterns continued, and Sarah called out her interpretations for each one. Some were easy, clear emotions she had seen before. Others were more subtle, complex combinations of colors and pulses that she interpreted based on her accumulated observations. She gave her best assessment for each, aware that her entire career might hinge on this impromptu test. After 15 different patterns, Thiela turned back to face her. The ambassador's scales were now displaying something Sarah had never seen before. A brilliant combination of purple, amber, and silver that seemed to shimmer across her entire back in waves. 14 out of 15 correct, Thiela said softly. And the one you missed was a complex diplomatic state that even young Valorians struggle to interpret. Captain Chin, you have just demonstrated pattern recognition abilities that no other species in the coalition possesses. The conference room erupted in conversation. Delegates spoke rapidly to each other in various languages, and Sarah's translator struggled to keep up with the overlapping voices. Council member Vex's scales were showing that agitated red and orange again, while other Valorian delegates displayed a range of colors Sarah was still learning to interpret. Ambassador Thiela raised her hand, and the room gradually quieted. This changes everything, she said, addressing the assembly. The human species has a natural ability to perceive and interpret our resonance patterns. This is unprecedented. This is... She paused, her scales shifting through several colors rapidly before settling on that purple and amber combination again. This is potentially revolutionary for human-Valorian relations. Or potentially dangerous, Vex interjected. Ambassador Thiela, our resonance patterns are deeply personal. They reveal our true emotional states, our uncertainties, our deceptions if we attempt them. If humans can read us so easily, they have an enormous advantage in any negotiation. Only if we treat this as adversarial, Thiela countered. Council member, consider the alternative interpretation. Captain Chen's ability to read our patterns has made her an exceptionally effective liaison precisely because she can understand us more completely. She has been responding to our actual emotional states rather than just our words. This has led to better outcomes in every negotiation she has participated in. Sarah found her voice again. Ambassador, Council Member Vex, if I may offer a perspective? In human culture, we value emotional honesty in diplomatic relations. We train our diplomats to read subtle cues, body language, tone of voice, facial microexpressions. We consider this skill essential for effective communication, not an invasion of privacy. If I can read your resonance patterns, I see it as similar to reading a human colleague's facial expressions. It helps me understand you better so I can work with you more effectively. Vex scales gradually shifted from agitated red to a more contemplative blue. An interesting framework, Captain. But the question remains, how many other humans possess this ability? If all humans can read us but we cannot read them with the same clarity, the relationship is fundamentally unbalanced. Then perhaps we need to test that question, Thiela said. And perhaps we need to consider teaching humans about our resonance patterns formally, so that this ability can be used with full cultural understanding rather than through trial and error. She turned back to Sarah, and her scales were showing that warm amber approval again. Captain Chin, you have created quite the situation. What began as an awkward question about why you were staring at my posterior has revealed a capability that could reshape human-Valorian cooperation. I am not certain whether to commend you or be exasperated with you. Despite everything, Sarah felt a laugh bubbling up. The absurdity of the situation, her career crisis transforming into a diplomatic breakthrough, all because she had been caught staring at her boss's backside, was too much to contain. Ambassador, I assure you that I am equally uncertain about how to feel about any of this. Thila's scales rippled with a pattern Sarah had not seen before, gentle waves of amber and silver that seemed almost playful. Are you laughing? Sarah asked. Valorians express amusement through resonance patterns rather than vocalizations, Thila explained. And yes, I find this situation highly amusing now that I understand it. You were conducting unauthorized anthropological research on my species by staring at my backside, and somehow this has become a potential cornerstone of improved interspecies relations. The other Valorian delegates were now also displaying that wave pattern, and Sarah realized the entire room was essentially laughing at the situation. Even Council Member Vec's scales had shifted to show hints of that silvery amusement pattern mixed with his cautious blue. This will require extensive discussion at the council level, Vec said, but his tone had softened. Ambassador Thila, I recommend we suspend regular negotiations until we can properly assess the implications of this discovery. Captain Chin, you have given us much to consider. Your honesty in this matter is noted and appreciated. As the meeting adjourned and the delegates filed out, Thila remained behind with Sarah. Her scales were still showing that warm amber glow of approval. That was either the best or worst moment of my diplomatic career, Sarah admitted. I still cannot tell which. Perhaps both, Thila suggested. You have definitely made an impression, Captain. The question now is what we do with this discovery. Her scales shifted to a more serious purple. Sarah? May I call you Sarah? I think we have moved past purely formal relations at this point. Of course, Ambassador. And please call me Sarah when we are in private. Then you may call me Thila. The ambassador's scales shimmered through several colors before settling on that purple curiosity mixed with amber warmth. Sarah, I need you to understand something. Our resonance patterns are deeply important to Valorian culture. They allow us to maintain social harmony because we cannot easily lie to each other about our emotional states. This shapes everything about how we interact, how we govern, how we build relationships. I'm beginning to understand that, Thila. And I'm genuinely sorry if my observation of your patterns felt invasive. That is what I am trying to determine, Thila said thoughtfully. Did it feel invasive? You were doing what came naturally to you, observing, analyzing, responding to what you perceived. You did not know you were seeing something private. From your perspective, you were simply being a good diplomat, reading your counterpart to better understand them. But from your perspective, I was seeing emotions and intentions you might not have chosen to share, Sarah finished. Exactly. And yet, Thila's scales shifted to that brilliant purple and amber combination again. The results of your observation have been remarkably positive. Our negotiations have been more productive, our communications clearer, our working relationship stronger than any I have had with human liaisons previously. If your ability to read me has led to better outcomes, is that truly a problem? That feels like a question you need to answer for yourself and your people, Sarah said carefully. I can tell you that from a human perspective, being able to understand you better has been invaluable. But I also recognize that different cultures have different boundaries around emotional privacy. They stood in silence for a moment, and Sarah watched the patterns on Thila's back shift through contemplative colors. Finally, the ambassador spoke again. The council will need to make formal decisions about how to handle this discovery. But personally, Sarah, I find myself fascinated by the possibilities. If humans can truly read our resonance patterns accurately, and if we can learn to work with that reality rather than fighting it, we might achieve a level of interspecies understanding that has never existed in the coalition before. Thila's scales brightened to that warm amber that Sarah now understood meant genuine approval and positive feeling. Also, the story of how this discovery happened, through you staring at my backside during meetings, is going to become legendary in diplomatic circles. I hope you are prepared for that. Sarah groaned. I'm going to be known as the human diplomat who solved an interspecies communication barrier by staring at an alien ambassadors, but aren't I? Absolutely, Thila confirmed, her scales rippling with that silvery amusement pattern. But you will also be known as the human who demonstrated capabilities that no one suspected your species possessed. That is not a bad legacy, Sarah. As they left the conference room together, Sarah reflected on how strange her life had become. 3 weeks ago, she had been a nervous junior diplomat hoping to make a good impression. Now she was at the center of what might become one of the most significant discoveries in human-alien relations. All because she had been paying attention to patterns and asking herself what they meant. And yes, because those patterns happened to be located on her supervisor's posterior region, which was going to be awkward to explain for the rest of her career. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the best breakthroughs came from unexpected places, from observations that seemed inappropriate until they revealed something profound, from questions that felt awkward to ask but needed to be answered. Sarah smiled to herself. She was definitely going to need to write a very interesting report about this. The discovery. The Valorian High Council chamber was unlike anything Sarah had seen before. The circular room seemed to exist in perpetual twilight, with bioluminescent panels lining the walls that responded to the emotional states of the council members present. As Sarah entered alongside Ambassador Thela, she watched in fascination as the walls rippled with colors that mirrored and amplified the resonance patterns of the 12 council members seated in a semicircle before them. It had been 3 days since the confrontation in the conference room, and Sarah had spent most of that time in a state of anxious uncertainty. She had submitted formal reports to both the Human Diplomatic Corps and the Valorian Embassy, explaining what had happened and what she had discovered. The response from Earth had been cautiously enthusiastic. Continue cooperation and await further instructions. The Valorian response had been this summons to appear before the High Council. Council member Vex sat at the center of the semicircle, his scales showing a complex pattern of blue and purple that Sarah interpreted as cautious curiosity. To his right sat the council speaker, an elderly Valorian female named Magistrate Sarah, whose scales bore intricate patterns that suggested decades of experience and authority. Captain Sarah Chin of Earth, Magistrate Sarah's voice resonated through the chamber, rich with harmonics that made Sarah's translator work overtime. You have been summoned before this council to discuss your unprecedented ability to perceive and interpret Valorian resonance patterns. We have reviewed Ambassador Thela's reports and testimony from witnesses present at the conference. The accuracy of your interpretations has been verified. What we must now determine is the implication of this discovery for Valorian human relations. Sarah stood straight, calling on every bit of diplomatic training she possessed. Magistrate, council members, I am honored to appear before you. I want to state clearly that I had no intention of violating Valorian cultural protocols. My observation of the resonance patterns was driven by a desire to better understand and serve my role as human liaison. Your intentions are not in question, Captain, Vex interjected, his scales flickering with that familiar red-orange agitation. What concerns us is capability. You have demonstrated an ability that fundamentally alters the dynamic of human-Valorian interaction. We must understand the scope of this ability. Is it unique to you or common among your species? Before Sarah could respond, Thela stepped forward. Council members, if I may address that question. In my communications with the Human Diplomatic Corps, I have learned that while not all humans possess Captain Chen's level of analytical skill, the basic visual capability appears to be species-wide. Human eyes have evolved to detect precisely the color ranges and subtle variations that our resonance patterns utilize. The council chamber erupted with the visual equivalent of shocked murmuring. Sarah watched as every council member's scales shifted through rapid color changes, reds, oranges, blues, purples, all flickering in agitated patterns. The walls responded, creating a dizzying display of reflected emotions. Magistrate Sarah raised one hand, and the room gradually settled. Are you saying that every human who looks at a Valorian can potentially see our emotional states? The raw visual data, yes, Thela confirmed. But interpretation requires what Captain Chin possesses: pattern recognition skills, observational discipline, and the analytical framework to correlate what she sees with meaning. Most humans would see the colors change but not understand what those changes signify. Sarah found her voice. Magistrate, if I may offer an analogy. Humans all have the ability to hear tone of voice and see facial expressions, but not all humans are equally skilled at interpreting those cues accurately. Some people are naturally better at reading emotions than others. I believe my ability to read Valorian resonance patterns is similar. I have the visual capability that all humans share, but I also have training in cross-cultural communication and a natural aptitude for pattern analysis. Council member Vex scales had shifted from agitation to that contemplative blue. An interesting framework, Captain. But it does not address our fundamental concern. For thousands of years, our resonance patterns have been our private communication channel. They allow us to maintain social honesty and cohesion because we assume only other Valorians can read them. If humans can see them, we lose that privacy. With respect, Council Member, Sarah said carefully, you only lose privacy if you consider human perception of your patterns to be a violation. In human culture, we constantly broadcast emotional information through facial expressions, body language, and vocal tone. We know others can see and interpret these signals, and we consider that a normal part of communication, not a breach of privacy. Magistrate Sarah's scales shifted to a bright purple curiosity. You are suggesting we reframe our understanding of the resonance patterns? I'm suggesting that the patterns serve a function that humans also value: emotional honesty in communication, Sarah explained, warming to her argument. The difference is that humans do it through multiple channels: visual, vocal, behavioral, while Valorians have concentrated that communication in the resonance patterns. But the underlying principle is the same. We want to understand each other accurately. We want our communications to be genuine. Captain Chin raises a profound point, spoke a council member Sarah had not heard from before, a younger Valorian male whose nameplate identified him as Research Director Kane. His scales showed vibrant purple with silver highlights, intense curiosity. Our anthropological studies of human culture have noted that humans place high value on what they call emotional intelligence, the ability to read and respond to others' emotional states. If humans can extend that capability to reading our resonance patterns, it represents a form of cross-species empathy that is exceptionally rare in the coalition. Or exceptionally dangerous, Vex countered, though his scales had softened from red to a more neutral blue. Director Kane, you speak of empathy, but the ability to read another's emotions can also be used for manipulation. Sarah knew this was a critical moment. Council Member Vex, you're absolutely right. Any communication ability can be used for good or ill. Humans can lie with words while smiling sincerely. We can manipulate through charm and false empathy. But we also have ethical frameworks around communication, professional standards for diplomats, and consequences for those who abuse trust. If humans are going to interact with Valorians while having the ability to read resonance patterns, then we need to establish clear protocols about how that ability should be used ethically. Thiela's scales brightened to that warm amber approval. Captain Chin is proposing what we should have been discussing from the beginning, not whether humans can read us, but how we establish mutual understanding and ethical guidelines around that capability. Magistrate Sarah's scales cycled through several colors before settling on a steady purple. A formal testing protocol then. Captain Chin, we wish to establish the full scope of your abilities and, by extension, human capabilities in this area. Are you willing to participate in comprehensive testing under controlled conditions? Yes, Magistrate. I'm willing to do whatever helps establish clear understanding. Excellent. Director Kane, you will oversee the testing protocols. Ambassador Thiela, you will serve as primary Valorian subject and liaison. Council Member Vex, I want you involved as observer to ensure our concerns about privacy and security are addressed. We convene again in 1 week to review findings. As the council adjourned, Sarah felt the weight of what she had agreed to. This was no longer just about her diplomatic assignment. This was about establishing precedent for how two species would interact at a fundamental level of communication. Director Kane approached her as the council members departed. His scales were still showing that vibrant purple curiosity. Captain Chin, I must confess I am extraordinarily excited about this testing. In all my years studying interspecies communication, I have never encountered a case quite like this. A species naturally capable of reading another species' primary emotional communication channel? The implications are staggering. I'm glad someone is excited, Sarah said with a slight smile. I'm mostly nervous about becoming a laboratory subject. Understandable but unnecessary, Kane assured her. His scales shifted to a warm amber mixed with that purple curiosity. Think of this as collaborative research rather than examination. You will be teaching us as much about human perception and cognition as we will be documenting about Valorian resonance patterns. It is a mutual discovery process. Over the next 5 days, Sarah participated in the most intensive testing she had ever experienced. Director Kane's research facility was state-of-the-art, equipped with sensors that tracked her eye movements, neural activity, and physiological responses while she observed and interpreted Valorian resonance patterns. The testing began simply. Kane would have various Valorian volunteers display specific emotional states while Sarah attempted to identify them. Her accuracy remained consistently high, between 80 and 90% correct, with most errors occurring on complex or subtle emotional states that even young Valorians struggled to interpret. Fascinating, Kane murmured, studying the data displays. Your error pattern matches what we see in Valorian adolescents learning to read complex social cues. You are not just seeing colors. You are processing them through pattern recognition frameworks that parallel our natural learning development. What does that mean exactly? Sarah asked during a break between testing sessions. Kane's scales shifted to that excited purple and silver combination. It means that human cognitive architecture, though evolved completely independently from Valorian neurology, has arrived at similar solutions for pattern recognition and social cognition. Your brain is processing our resonance patterns using the same general strategies that Valorian brains evolved to use. Convergent cognitive evolution, if you will. Ambassador Thela, who had been serving as one of the primary test subjects, joined them. Her scales were showing a mix of amber warmth and blue thoughtfulness. Director, what are the implications of this for communication training? If Sarah's accuracy is this high with only 2 weeks of unconscious observation, what could humans achieve with formal instruction in resonance pattern interpretation? That is precisely what I want to test next, Kane said eagerly. Captain Chin, I want to try something different. Instead of having you interpret patterns you have already observed in context, I want to teach you the formal structure of our resonance language. The grammar, if you will, of how colors combine, how pulse patterns modify meaning, how location on the body affects interpretation. Sarah felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. You want to actually teach me your language? I want to see if you can learn it, Kane corrected. No non-Valorian has ever been taught our resonance language because no other species could perceive it accurately enough. But you can see it. The question is whether you can learn to read it fluently. What followed were the most intellectually intense 3 days of Sarah's life. Kane proved to be an exceptional teacher, breaking down the resonance pattern language into components that Sarah's human mind could grasp. Colors had base meanings. Amber for positive states, blue for caution or concern, red for negative or aggressive states, purple for curiosity, green for neutral processing. But those base meanings were modified by intensity, pulse rate, pattern configuration, and bodily location. A slow pulsing blue on the lower back meant cautious consideration. The same blue rapidly pulsing on the upper spine meant active alarm. Amber concentrated on the hip plates meant personal contentment, while amber spread across the full back meant social approval of others. Combinations created nuance. Purple and amber together meant interested approval, while purple and blue indicated curious skepticism. Sarah absorbed the lessons voraciously, her pattern recognition abilities working overtime to catalog the variations. She practiced by observing the research assistants who worked in Kane's lab, attempting to read their emotional states during normal activities. Her accuracy climbed into the mid-90% range. Remarkable, Kane announced on the third day reviewing her latest test scores. In 3 days of formal instruction, you have achieved proficiency levels that take Valorian children 3 to 4 years to develop. Captain Chin, your species' capacity for this form of communication exceeds anything I hypothesized. Council member Vex, who had been observing the testing with continued skepticism, spoke up. Director Kane, I acknowledge that Captain Chen's abilities are impressive. But I must raise a practical concern. We have been testing in controlled laboratory conditions with willing subjects. Real-world diplomatic situations are far more complex. How do we know that humans will use this capability responsibly? How do we prevent it from becoming a tool for manipulation? Before Kane could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Sarah's translator picked up urgent Valorian voices: trade dispute escalating, Zentari delegation threatening to withdraw, coalition unity at risk. Thela's scales flashed bright red, alarm and urgency. That is the Zentari situation. They have been in difficult negotiations with the coalition regarding resource rights. If they withdraw, it could destabilize the entire Eastern Sector alliance. She turned to Vex. Council member, this is exactly the kind of crisis where effective communication is critical. Vex's scales showed agitated red and orange. Agreed. But what does this have to do with our current situation? Sarah felt an idea forming. Council member, you wanted to know if humans could use resonance pattern reading responsibly in real-world situations. What if this crisis becomes a test case? What if I participate in the Zentari negotiations as an observer, using my ability to read Valorian emotional states to help facilitate better communication? Absolutely not, Vex said immediately, his scales flaring bright red. The Zentari negotiations are far too important to risk on an experimental approach. With respect, council member, what do you have to lose? Sarah pressed. I would be observing only, not leading the negotiations. If my insights help, you gain value. If they don't, you're no worse off than you would have been without me. Thiela's scales had shifted to that purple and amber combination. Interested approval. She makes a valid point, Vex. And consider this. The Zentari are a highly vocal species. They communicate primarily through auditory channels and have limited visual acuity. They cannot see our resonance patterns at all. But if Sarah can read the Valorian negotiating team's true emotional states and provide real-time feedback, it might help bridge communication gaps. Vex scales cycled through several colors. Red resistance, blue caution, purple curiosity, finally settling on a reluctant amber. Very well. But you will have no direct role in the negotiations, Captain Chin. You will observe only, and any insights you have will be communicated to Ambassador Thiela privately for her discretion in how to use them. Understood. Understood, council member. Thank you for this opportunity. 2 hours later, Sarah found herself in an observation room adjacent to the main negotiation chamber. Through a transparent wall, she could see the Valorian delegation headed by Magistrate Sarah facing the Zentari representatives via holographic projection. The Zentari were imposing beings, large, heavily muscled, with voices that resonated at frequencies that made Sarah's bones vibrate even through the wall. Thiela sat beside Sarah in the observation room, a communication device allowing them to speak without being heard in the main chamber. The core issue, Thiela explained quietly, is that the Zentari want exclusive mining rights to asteroid fields that the Coalition considers shared resources. They feel they have been treated unfairly in previous resource allocations. We believe they are posturing for better terms, but we need to find a compromise that satisfies their honor concerns without destabilizing the resource-sharing framework. Sarah nodded, watching the negotiation begin. The Zentari chief negotiator was speaking forcefully, his translated words demanding and aggressive. Sarah shifted her attention to the Valorian delegation, reading their resonance patterns. Magistrate Sarah's scales showed steady blue with slow pulsing, cautious and thoughtful, not alarmed. Good. She was not reacting to the Zentari aggression with matching hostility. The other Valorian negotiators displayed a mix of patterns. One showed red flickering, she was taking the Zentari demands as insults. Another showed green with amber hints, processing the information but remaining open. A third displayed complex purple and blue combinations, skeptical but curious about the Zentari position. Thiela, Sarah said softly, Magistrate Sarah is holding steady, but the negotiator on her left is showing hostile responses. The red flickering means she is taking this personally, right? Thiela glanced at the patterns. Yes. That is Negotiator Vela. She tends toward defensive reactions when she feels our position is being challenged. If she speaks next, she might escalate the confrontation. The magistrate should respond instead, or direct someone showing more neutral patterns to engage. Thiela activated her private communication link to Magistrate Sarah, speaking too quietly for Sarah to hear. In the negotiation chamber, Sarah subtly shifted her position, effectively cutting off Vela before she could speak and directing another negotiator to respond instead. The pattern continued. Sarah watched the resonance patterns of the Valorian team, identifying when negotiators were feeling defensive, when they were genuinely considering Zentari points, when they were confused by translation issues. She relayed observations to Thiela, who provided gentle guidance to Sarah. An hour into the negotiation, the Zentari made a surprising proposal, a shared mining operation with phased resource allocation. Sarah immediately noticed a shift in the Valorian patterns. Most of the team showed purple curiosity mixed with amber approval. This was interesting to them, they saw potential value. But two negotiators showed complex blue and red patterns. They had concerns they were not voicing. Thiela, most of your team likes the Zentari proposal, but two members have serious reservations they are not speaking up about. If those concerns are not addressed, they might cause problems implementing any agreement. Thiela consulted with Sarah, and the magistrate called for a brief recess. During the break, Sarah watched through the transparent wall as Sarah spoke privately with the two concerned negotiators, drawing out their reservations. When negotiations resumed, Sarah raised specific questions about the Zentari proposal that addressed those unspoken concerns. Questions about timeline, oversight authority, and dispute resolution. The Zentari, impressed that the Valorians were engaging seriously with the details rather than rejecting the proposal outright, became more flexible in their own positions. Sarah continued reading the Valorian patterns, helping Thela identify when the team was reaching genuine consensus versus when individual members were simply deferring to avoid conflict. 3 hours later, a preliminary agreement was reached. The Zentari would get priority access to certain asteroid fields in exchange for technology sharing and joint development of others. Both sides seemed satisfied. The Zentari felt their concerns had been heard and addressed, while the Valorians had maintained the coalition framework while making acceptable accommodations. As the Zentari delegation signed off and the Valorian team began gathering their materials, Council Member Vex entered the observation room. His scales were showing a complex pattern Sarah had not seen before, amber and purple with silver highlights, all pulsing in synchronized rhythm. "That was extraordinary," Vex said, and his voice carried none of its earlier skepticism. "Captain Chin, I was monitoring your observations and their outcomes. At least 4 times, your insights about our team's resonance patterns led to interventions that prevented potential breakdowns in the negotiation. Ambassador Thela, how did it feel to have Sarah's additional perspective?" Thela's scales were glowing with that warm amber approval mixed with purple fascination. "Council member, it was like having perfect clarity about my own team's emotional state in real time. Sarah identified concerns before they became problems, spotted consensus when it emerged, and helped me understand when our team was truly aligned versus superficially agreeing. It transformed the negotiation process." Director Kane entered, his scales showing excited purple. "I was reviewing the recordings, analyzing the correlation between Sarah's observations and the actual resonance patterns. Her accuracy in reading complex emotional states was 97%. 97%, Council member. In a high-stakes, real-world situation with no controlled conditions." Vex scales cycled through several colors before settling on a steady amber mixed with blue, approval tempered with thoughtful concern. "I must revise my assessment. Captain Chen's ability is not a threat to Valorian privacy. It is a potential asset for Valorian-human cooperation. But it also means we need to fundamentally rethink how our species interact." Magistrate Sarah entered the observation room, and Sarah stood respectfully. The elderly Valorian scales showed a warm amber glow. "Captain Chin, Ambassador Thela has been relaying your insights throughout the negotiation. Your contributions were invaluable. You helped us achieve consensus within our own team as much as you helped us negotiate with the Zentari." "Thank you, Magistrate. I'm honored to have been able to help." Sarah moved closer, studying Sarah with those luminous amber eyes. "Young human, you have demonstrated something I have not seen in 40 years of diplomatic service. A non-Valorian who can understand us at a level of emotional depth that most species cannot access. This is a gift, but it also carries responsibility. How we proceed from here will set precedent for all future human-Valorian interaction." "I understand, Magistrate. I want to use this ability ethically and with full respect for Valorian culture." "I believe you do," Sarah said, her scales shifting to purple curiosity. "But belief is not enough. We need structures, protocols, training programs. If humans can read our resonance patterns, then we must teach them to do so properly, with full understanding of the cultural context and ethical responsibilities involved." Director Kane's scales brightened with excitement. "Magistrate, I would like to propose establishing a formal cross-species communication program. We could train selected human diplomats in resonance pattern interpretation while also teaching Valorians about human emotional communication systems. A mutual educational exchange." "An intriguing proposal," Sarah acknowledged, "but it would require High Council approval and extensive cultural preparation on both sides. Which is why Captain Chen would be perfect to help develop the program," Thela interjected. "She has lived experience of learning the resonance language from both unconscious observation and formal instruction. She understands both human and Valorian perspectives on emotional communication. Who better to bridge our cultures?" Sarah felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. "I would be honored to contribute to such a program, but I'm just one person. This seems like it requires expertise beyond what I possess." "You possess the most important expertise," Vex said, and his scales showed something that looked like respect. "You have demonstrated that humans and Valorians can communicate at a depth we did not think possible between our species. You have done this not through technology or force, but through observation, pattern recognition, and genuine desire to understand. That is precisely the foundation such a program needs." Over the next few hours, the group worked to outline what a formal cross-species communication program might look like. Humans would be taught resonance pattern interpretation, but only those who demonstrated both the visual capability and the ethical disposition to use it responsibly. Valorians would be taught about human emotional communication, learning to read facial expressions, vocal tone, and body language with greater accuracy. There is one more element we should consider, Sarah said during a break in planning. Humor. The way this whole situation started, with Ambassador Thela confronting me about staring at her posterior, has become somewhat legendary. That humor, that ability to acknowledge awkwardness while moving past it, was crucial to turning a potential crisis into a breakthrough. Thela's scales rippled with that silvery amusement pattern. Sarah is correct. When I asked her directly why she was staring at my butt instead of making assumptions, it created space for honest explanation. And when we could laugh about the absurdity of the situation, it reduced tension and allowed genuine communication. So we should incorporate humor and acknowledgement of awkwardness into the training program? Kane asked, his scales showing intrigued purple. Absolutely, Sarah confirmed. Cross-cultural communication is inherently awkward sometimes. Acknowledging that, even laughing about it, can build trust rather than damaging it. The story of how I accidentally discovered resonance pattern reading should be part of the training, not despite the embarrassing elements but because of them. It demonstrates that breakthroughs often come from unexpected places and that asking direct questions, even uncomfortable ones, is better than making assumptions. Magistrate Sarah's scales shifted to a warm amber mixed with that silvery amusement. So the official history of human Valorian communication advancement will include the phrase, "Why do you keep looking at my butt?" If we're being historically accurate, yes, Thela said, her scales glowing with obvious amusement. Vex, surprisingly, showed the amusement pattern as well. Future diplomats will study this case as an example of how direct communication and mutual willingness to move past initial awkwardness can create unprecedented opportunities for cooperation. Or, Sarah added with a grin, they'll study it as an example of how one human diplomat's terrible observation skills led to the most embarrassing incident in her career that somehow became a positive diplomatic outcome. The room filled with the visual equivalent of laughter, scales rippling with silver and amber patterns, walls reflecting and amplifying the shared amusement. As the meeting concluded and plans were made to present the communication program proposal to the High Council, Sarah found herself alone with Ambassador Thela in the observation room. "You changed everything, you know," Thela said softly, her scales showing warm amber with purple highlights. 3 weeks ago, you were a nervous junior diplomat hoping to make a good impression. Now you are going to be the foundation of a new era in human Valorian relations. 3 weeks ago, I was also apparently a diplomat who spent all her time staring at her supervisor's backside, Sarah replied. Let's not forget that part. Oh, I assure you no one is going to forget that part, Thela said, her scales dancing with amusement. It is far too good a story. But Sarah, I want you to understand something serious beneath the humor. What you did, the observation, the pattern recognition, the willingness to explain when confronted, the desire to use your discovery ethically, all of that represents the best of what humanity can offer in interspecies cooperation. Sarah felt emotion tightening her throat. Thank you, Thela. That means more than you know. And what I did, asking directly instead of assuming, being willing to laugh at the awkwardness, seeing the potential in what could have been treated as a violation, I hope that represents the best of Valorian engagement with other species as well. They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, Sarah watching the patterns on Thela's back shift through gentle colors of contentment and satisfaction. Can I ask you something? Sarah said finally. That first day when you confronted me in the conference room, what did you really think was happening? Before I explained about the patterns. Thela's scales flickered through several colors. Embarrassment, amusement, thoughtfulness, before settling on honest amber. I genuinely thought you were attracted to me and expressing it through what I understood as inappropriate human staring. I was trying to determine whether to be offended or curious about human mating behaviors. Sarah laughed, a genuine burst of surprised amusement. Oh my God, you thought I was hitting on you? It seemed the most logical explanation at the time, Thela defended, though her scales were showing pure amusement now. Humans often engage in what you call, checking each other out. Yes? I thought perhaps you were applying that behavior to interspecies interaction, which would have been forward but not entirely offensive. I was absolutely not checking you out. I was conducting unauthorized anthropological research by staring at your emotional communication organs. Which, when phrased that way, sounds almost worse, Thela pointed out, her scales dancing with silver amusement. It really does, Sarah agreed, laughing. This story just gets better and better. Speaking of which, Thela said, her scales shifting to that purple curiosity, Now that you can read my patterns fluently, you should know that I find this entire situation genuinely delightful. The absurdity, the breakthrough, the partnership we are building, all of it. My resonance patterns are showing pure amber and purple happiness right now. Sarah looked at Thila's back and saw that it was true, warm amber mixed with vibrant purple, pulsing in gentle, happy rhythms. I can see that. And I'm glad because honestly, this has been the strangest and best 3 weeks of my life. Mine as well, Sarah. Mine as well. 6 months later, Sarah stood before a class of 20 human diplomats and 15 Valorian cultural specialists in the first official session of the Human-Valorian Communication Integration Program. The classroom was designed to accommodate both species comfortably, with adjustable seating and lighting that allowed everyone to see the instructional displays clearly. Welcome, Sarah began, to what is officially called the Cross-Species Emotional Communication Program, but what everyone actually calls the Butt-Staring Incident Resolution Initiative. The room erupted in laughter, both audible human laughter and the silent, visual amusement of Valorian scales rippling with silver patterns. The story of how this program came to exist is both embarrassing and instructive, Sarah continued, and we're going to start with it because it teaches the single most important lesson about cross-cultural communication. When in doubt, ask directly. Even if the question is uncomfortable. Even if the answer might be embarrassing. Because assumptions are almost always worse than awkward honesty. Beside her, Ambassador Thila, now formally her co-director of the program, added, "The moment I asked Sarah why she kept looking at my posterior, I created space for explanation rather than allowing misunderstanding to fester. That one uncomfortable question led to the discovery that has brought us all here today." As Sarah launched into the formal curriculum, teaching her human students the basics of resonance pattern interpretation while Thila taught the Valorian students about human facial microexpressions, she reflected on how far they had come. The High Council had approved the communication program unanimously after witnessing how effectively Sarah's abilities had enhanced the Zentari negotiations. More than that, they had created a new diplomatic position specifically for her. Human Valorian Cultural Liaison with authority to train others and establish protocols for ethical use of resonance pattern reading. It was not the career path Sarah had imagined when she first arrived at the Valorian embassy, nervous and hoping to make a good impression. But it was better. It was meaningful work that would shape how two species understood each other for generations to come. All because she had paid attention to patterns. All because Thila had asked an uncomfortable question. All because they had both been willing to move past the awkwardness to find the truth. And yes, all because Sarah had spent an inappropriate amount of time staring at her supervisor's backside in pursuit of understanding. It made for one hell of a story. As the class progressed and Sarah watched her students, both human and Valorian, begin to grasp the fundamentals of each other's emotional communication systems, she caught Thila's eye. The ambassador's scales were glowing with warm amber approval mixed with purple fascination and silver joy. Sarah smiled, understanding perfectly what those patterns meant. We did this. We built something important. And yes, it started absurdly, but it ended up maturing. Sometimes the best discoveries came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes asking, "Why do you keep looking at my butt?" was exactly the right question to unlock unprecedented cross-species understanding. And sometimes, Sarah thought with amusement, your career legacy was going to be forever tied to having stared at an alien ambassador's posterior until you accidentally decoded an entire emotional language. She could live with that. The end.